Well, welcome back. And we just went at the speed of when we got done last week, I thought, do we sound like we're on speed? Because that's about the pace sometimes this feels like. So I hope that's not too, disquieting for you, because we're doing about 7 principles almost every single night. And just by way of review, I wanted to mention the ones that we talked about were that the best government is based on natural law. The worst government is not. That it takes virtuous people who can govern themselves and have an internal mechanism for their behavior that can be free. Otherwise, they have to have masters. The third principle was that those are the kind of people who elect the best leaders. So your leadership is absolutely a reflection of the morality of the people. The fourth principle was that religion is necessary to good government, something which we've got to be not afraid to tell people who think that it should be completely separate and not even really in the public square. The fifth is that and I love something that Becky said in the prayer, not only are we equally dependent upon God, we're equally responsible to him. There's responsibilities to these rights. And then the sixth principle was that we are all created equal under God, in the eyes of God, without there actually being equal outcomes, which is what number 7 is. The government is to protect rights, not to provide equal things. And that brings us to this, what is an unalienable right? We are endowed by a creator with certain unalienable rights. And what that means is they come with us.
These are inherent rights given to us by the Creator. No one can take these rights away from us without being subject to God's justice. So although there are tyrants who will try, they will be accountable. I think this is Locke.
Okay, so we always forget because we have so many. But Locke was really one that the founders turned to often. And much of what Jefferson wrote sounds like, oh boy, he read Locke. This is what he said. The state of nature has a law of nature to govern it, which teaches all mankind who will but consult it, that being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. That's the most basic of all natural laws. Leave each other alone in, doing bad things. 4, men being all the workmanship of one omnipotent and infinitely wise maker, all the servants of one sovereign master, sent into the world by his order and about his business, they are his property. And being furnished with like faculties, sharing all in one community of nature, there cannot be supposed any such subordination among us that may authorize us to destroy one another. That really underscores that we're here equally. So for anyone to suppose that he's supposed to be above another is just, beyond hubris.
So when is a right unalienable? William Blackstone said, those rights then, which God and nature have established and are therefore called natural rights, such as our life and liberty, need not the aid of human laws to be more effectually invested in every man than they are. Neither do they receive any additional strength when declared by the municipal laws to be inviolable. On the contrary, no human legislature has power to abridge or destroy them unless the owner shall himself commit some act that amounts to a forfeiture. So we have these rights and we don't need the law to tell us that we have them. The law doesn't make them any stronger. They are ours from our Creator. And the only way that they would be abridged is if we destroy them ourselves by committing some kind of a crime where we then need to be held accountable.
Those rights, yeah.
Right.
Life cannot maintain itself alone, meaning you have to do something to support yourself and stay alive. The Creator of life has entrusted us with the responsibility of preserving, developing, and perfecting it. In order that we may accomplish this, he has provided us with a collection of marvelous faculties, and he has put us, boy, I'm having a hard time reading tonight, forgive me. He has put us in the midst of a variety of natural resources. By the application of our faculties to these natural resources, we convert them into products and use them. Life, faculties, production, in other words, individuality, liberty, property, this is man. And in spite of the cunning of artful political leaders, these 3 gifts from God precede all human legislation. The reason human legislation even began was to protect those things. And they're superior to it, those things that came first. Life, liberty, and property do not exist because men have made laws. On the contrary, It was the fact that life, liberty, and property existed beforehand that caused men to make laws for the protection of them in the first place. Just think of even something where, like, I don't know, my brain always goes to Lost because that's, a more modern day Lost on a desert island kind of thing where you have to start over again. And people are worried about their things or they're worried about being protected. And so some law and order comes about so that people can be protected. Government always starts, someone becomes in charge of a group to protect the group, not to run the group.
So the ninth principle is that to protect man's rights, God has revealed certain principles of divine law. William Blackstone said, "These are the eternal and mutable laws of good and evil, to which the Creator himself in all his dispensations conforms." One time I was teaching my kids, and my little girl said, "Well, that's interesting that God keeps his laws, but sometimes leaders don't."
She got it.
She got it. And which he has enabled human reason to discover, so far as they are necessary for the conduct of human actions. Such, among others, are these principles: that we should live honestly, should hurt nobody, and should render to everyone his due. And just because we find these things in the scriptures, and one day we came across this, we had
Yeah, we
to
just
share.
couldn't help ourselves. Listen to the exact same wording.
Which, if you're doing Come Follow Me,
It was this week.
there it is. Ye will not have a mind to injure one another, but to live peaceably, and to render to every man according to that which is his due. It works in every dispensation of time.
That is what natural law, the ultimate natural law is. Would you like someone to come and take the things that you worked to build? Then you shouldn't take other people's things that they worked to build. So natural law constitutes eternal principles. And I love this because in this principle, they really kind of sometimes delineate that natural law and divine law, while the same thing, that often natural law will be used to describe more a natural phenomenon like gravity or velocity or entropy, whereas divine law has to do more with human behavior. But they both stem from the same God, and they both have the same irrevocable nature as far as inescapable consequences. Both of them do. But so I love this, that Blackstone is kind of acknowledging that this comes from God and it's eternal and it can't be changed. The doctrines thus delivered we call the revealed or divine law, and they are to be found only in the Holy Scriptures. These precepts, when revealed, are found upon comparison to be really part of the original law of nature, as they tend in all their consequences to man's felicity. And I love that because he understood that the wickedness never was happiness, that he really did understand that happiness is the consequence of
fruit
of staying with these laws, of adhering to them.
So we talked a little bit already, but divine law endows mankind with unalienable duties. And Jefferson said, man has no natural right in opposition to his social duties. They come together. And some of the examples of public and private duties are these, and you may
put
find
the page number in the book in case
Yeah.
you've got the book.
But you are to be honest in all your transactions. You're not to contrive through a covetous heart to despoil another. You should provide in so far as possible for the needs of the helpless. You should be temperate. Become economically self-sufficient. Maintain integrity of the family structure. I don't think people think about that. That's a duty. Perpetuate the race, something that we're being told we better not do these days. Support personal and public standards of common decency, and follow rules of moral rectitude.
So John Locke also said, the law of nature stands as an eternal rule to all men, legislators as well as others. Oh, that people knew that one. The rules that they make for man's actions must be conformable to the law of nature, that is, to the will of God. So this ties right back to principle 1. You can probably tell if you were with us last week. And then Blackstone added to his commentary, man considered as a creature must necessarily be subject to the laws of his creator. It just makes so much sense. Of course, you should owe something to the being who created you. This will of his maker is called the law of nature. And I love that means he tied the will of God to the law of nature. Don't you love that? This law of nature being coeval, that means they existed at the same time with mankind. So the law of nature is as old as mankind itself. and dictated by God himself, is, of course, superior in obligation to any other. It is binding over all the globe, in all countries, and at all times. No human laws are of any validity if contrary to this. That sounds just right out of Cicero that we talked about last week.
Which leads us to principle 10. The God-given right to govern is vested in the sovereign authority of the whole people.
So that's where the
Go ahead.
source is. Now, Algernon Sidney is someone who the founders also read. He was a contemporary of Locke. Both of them were accused of being a part of a revolution in England in the 1600s, after the the American colonies were being established. Locke escaped to the Netherlands. Sidney was imprisoned and beheaded. And the thing that's interesting is I don't believe he was involved. My understanding is that he was not involved in the plot, but his writings condemned him, because one of the things he wrote about was that the rights didn't come from God for a king to rule, because people should do it. No person can rightfully rule a people without their consent. So that was revolutionary, to a king, opposite of the popular idea of the divine right to rule. So his writings actually cost him his life. One of the things he said was, they who place the power to govern in a multitude understand a multitude composed of free men who think it for their convenience to join together. So they decide together. That's what social compact means. And to establish such laws and rules as they oblige themselves to observe. So if you decide you're going to be in charge of a group, it's just a given, it should be a given that those rules will be applied to you as well.
John Locke said, whoever gets into the exercise of any part of the power by other ways than what the laws of the community have prescribed hath no right to be obeyed. Which is interesting, because if we have, like we have a constitution, we have laws, this is how we do it. And if you get into power by another way, then he's saying, you don't need to worry. That is not the way to go. And luckily we do have a constitution that will help us to change if we understand it, if we know
Yes.
what
Yeah,
it
the
says.
Constitution basically tells us that we don't need to use any kind of means
Pitchforks.
outside the law, yes, to get our way. In light of what's happening in current events, you can just chortle in
Yeah.
your socks over that one.
So the founders used the Anglo-Saxons as a model. They really studied ancient Israel, and they studied the Anglo-Saxons. And so,
Which was also ancient Israel. That's where they got
Right.
theirs.
so here's where they said that the rulers were servants of the people, and all sovereign authority to appoint or remove a ruler rests with the people. The chief owed his office to the tribal assembly, which selected him and could also depose him. His authority was limited at every turn, and though he no doubt commanded respect, his opinion carried no more weight in the debates of the assembly than that of any free man.
I wish we could get back to that. Oh
Mhm.
my goodness, we've lost so much of that. Now, I want to stop right here because we quoted the Federalist Papers last week, and we're going to quote them again tonight. And just in case you don't know this, after the Constitution was ratified by the Congress anyway, the Constitutional Convention rather, excuse me, in September 17th, Constitution Day, 1787, it went out to the states because they had written it right into the law. 3/5 of the states had to ratify it, approve it for it to become the law of the land. And imagine New York was one of the states
Struggle.
they did not want it. They did not want it. There was so much pushback because of what they had just come through with that horrible war. Anything that looked like it was going to bind them to a federal government just freaked them out. So because they felt like there needed to be some binding power between these sovereign states to call the United States, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison wrote a selection of essays that were published in papers primarily in New York State to convince them of the wisdom of this. It has since, those 83 essays have since become the Federalist Papers. So if it says Federalist 22, that was an essay that showed up sometime between September of 1787 and the spring of 1788, when the Constitution was exactly ratified. So I just thought that was important because we're going to be talking about it a little bit. So Hamilton said, the fabric of American empire ought to rest on the solid basis of the consent of the people. I love this terminology. The streams of national power Think of a stream, the biggest one that everything else flows into. The streams of national power ought to flow immediately from that pure original fountain of all legitimate authority. I love the imagery of that to show the power of understanding this comes from the people, this power.
And I love that it says legitimate authority.
Legitimate, yes, that's
Yeah.
a great modifier, isn't it?
Yeah. So our 11th principle is that the majority of the people may alter or abolish a government which has become tyrannical. Now, you guys just decide if you've ever heard this before, okay?
This is like our quiz, the one and only
Yeah, our
quiz.
quiz. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. So we don't just change the law every time somebody's unhappy. You find that you will put up with quite a bit before finally you say,
Making great big changes.
Yeah.
Radical changes.
but when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. How
So when
many
it's
of you,
apparent that that's where
Yeah.
you're going is to lose your liberty.
how many of you have heard this before? Cindy, you're going to have to be able, you can put it in the comments, but I just wonder how many have heard of it and how many are not sure where it is from.
Anyone? I really would be curious to see.
I would too, but I don't, Cindy, you're in charge.
I'm in charge. Okay, so I'm just watching the comments just to see if anything is going to come through. And if somebody wants to say something, they can just unmute themselves. Also, if they don't want to type in something.
Yeah, if
Yes.
anybody's heard this before. If you haven't, it's
Yes.
okay. Just
Oh, we
wondering.
need the Jeopardy music. Right.
Yeah, I wish I had it.
Yeah.
Anyway, no takers?
Oh, Colleen says she's heard of it.
Of course she
Okay,
has.
where have you heard of it? Because is Becky still on? Because I'm a little alarmed. No, I'm just
She
teasing
might be
Beck.
back.
Yeah, she probably
So
is.
Colleen, where is it from?
Or have you just heard it?
Declaration.
Sorry.
Oh,
You were asking where I've heard of the quote.
Mhm.
Yeah, have you heard, do you know the reference?
Yeah,
okay.
isn't it the Declaration of Independence? Because they're
Yes.
It is
explaining why.
indeed.
It is the Declaration of
Oh, that we
Independence.
had a door prize for.
Yes, because lots of times there's people that have never really heard that. And so our little plea right now is that at least every July 4th, you find the Declaration of Independence and you read it every year, one time a year. That's not very much. And
Yeah.
you'll love it. I love it.
But isn't that powerful to understand? We don't just throw things off for light and transient causes. That means, things come and things go, things irritate us and we move on. But if you see a pattern that keeps evolving and developing that makes it unmistakable that someone wants to take your
That
liberty, it's not just your right to say, you don't get to do this to me. That's even true in your own life. What are boundaries about? It's also our duty to do it because of the fact that God gave us choice. So to let someone run your life and then call yourself a victim, if you can fight it while you can fight it, it's our duty to do that. That's so strong. The reason why men enter into society is the preservation of their property. Again, that's why they start a social compact, so someone can protect them and their stuff. Therefore, whenever the legislators endeavor to take away and destroy the property of the people, or to reduce them to slavery under arbitrary power, that means the officials in here, put themselves into a state of war with the people, who are thereupon absolved from any further obedience. Wow. And are left to the common refuge which God hath provided for all men against force and violence. Whensoever, therefore, the legislative shall transgress this fundamental rule of society, and either now look at the reasons why legislators do this, by ambition, that's their love of power, fear, folly, that's just sheer foolishness, or corruption, if for any of those reasons they endeavor to grasp themselves or put into the hands of any other an absolute power over the lives, liberties, and estates of the people, by this breach of trust, they forfeit the power the people put into their hands. That's what these men believed about what the seriousness of the crime of despotism. and it devolves to the people who have a right to resume their original liberty and provide for their own safety and security. That's John Locke. I was pretty sure it was Locke, but I didn't dare say it.
Well, this is kind of an important point. There is no right of revolt in an individual, a group, or a minority, only in the majority. John Locke said, for if the unlawful act of government reach no farther than some private men's cases, though they have a right to defend themselves, so he's not saying that you don't have a right, yet the right to do so will not easily engage them in a contest because there's just not enough of them. It being as impossible for one or a few oppressed men to disturb the government where the body of the people do not think themselves concerned in it. So if you can't get enough people to your cause, it generally doesn't end well for you when you go against the force
Yeah.
of the government. But if either of these illegal acts have extended to the majority of the people, or if the mischief and oppression has light struck only on some few, but in such cases as the precedent and consequences seem to threaten all, and they are persuaded in their consciences that their laws, and with them their estates, liberties, and lives are in danger, and perhaps their religion too, how they will be hindered from resisting illegal force used against them, I cannot tell. So he's saying when it seems to threaten everybody, then you really have a cause, and then you may be able to see some action. But when it's just a few people, even though you have been wronged, it's very hard to go against the government without it ending badly for you, which we've seen in the past.
Okay, those first principles kind of go quickly because this one and 14 that we're doing tonight
Are big.
are both a little big, and this one is so important. I've had conversations with people just this very week because of the state GOP convention that just happened, because there's just so much tension right now between the idea of a republic and a democracy. So this one we just feel like is so important because the founders really did set the United States up to be a republic. And we're going to talk about why that's become so misunderstood in the last, probably just over a century. So a democracy becomes increasingly unwieldy and inefficient as the population grows. And think about that. If you want to have everyone have a vote, you have to have it where everybody can be there to have a vote. So that just the
You
more
can just
people
look at it
involved-
in our voting system.
Yeah, for sure.
You can just watch. As you listen to some of these reasons, you'll go, oh yeah, I think that's true.
So true.
Yeah.
But a republic governs through elected representatives and can be expanded indefinitely, which we'll see as we go. Go ahead.
So Skousen said, theoretically, a democracy requires the full participation of the masses of the people in the legislative or decision-making processes of government. This has never worked because the people become so occupied with their daily tasks that they will not properly study the issues, nor will they take the time to participate in extensive hearings before the vote is taken. The Greeks tried to use democratic mass participation in the government of their city-states, and each time it ended in tyranny. So,
Well, because you have to assume with a democracy, I didn't mean to cut you off, is that everybody knows the issues, and that's never going to be true ever.
which I would just say, as my own personal opinion, that each time it ended in tyranny makes me wonder why there's such a push to call us a democracy and try to push us in that direction.
Well,
Because
we've talked about this quite a bit,
people-
two of us, through the teaching of this class.
people who want to take charge know the mechanisms by which to do so. That's all I'm going to say. And I'm not talking about any party, by the way.
No, oh no. In fact, I'd like to go just one step further. Those of you who were with us last week, and we talked about that pendulum swinging between tyranny and anarchy. Democracy tends to push the pendulum to anarchy, which we'll talk about, which then demands a
Okay.
strong man of some kind to restore law and order, which then pushes it to
The other
tyranny.
way.
And remember, that's what the founders were trying to avoid and prevent. They wanted something in the middle to keep that pendulum from swinging so erratically between anarchy and tyranny. So we'll keep talking about that as we go here. So, and I think this is Madison,
Mhm.
and this is just one of my in fact, this was in one of the Federalist papers. Democracies have ever, these men did not mince words. They were careful with their words. Democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general, now notice how he dials this back here, have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. That is so strong. He goes on, a republic, by which I mean a government in which the scheme of representation takes place, opens a different prospect and promises the cure for which we are seeking. They felt like a Republican form of government that was democratically executed would stop that turbulence.
We may define a republic to be a government which derives all its powers directly or indirectly from the great body of the people and is administered by persons holding their office during pleasure for a limited period. Might have put that in bold. For a limited period or during good behavior. Either one could be in bold.
Let's put them both in bold. Yes, indeed.
It is essential to such a government that it be derived from the great body of the society, not from an inconsiderable proportion or a favored class of it. Otherwise, a handful of tyrannical nobles, exercising their oppressions by a delegation of their powers, might aspire to the rank of republicans and claim for their government the honorable title of republic.
When nothing would be further from the truth.
Right.
Again, notice from the Federalist Papers. So here's the part we feel like is so important. The background that Skousen gives in this chapter of where democracy came from is fascinating. We didn't know any of it. Excuse me, do you want to do this for just a second?
The word democracy becomes a casualty of an ideological war. So today, the average American uses the term democracy to describe America's traditional constitutional republic because it just, this is what's been put in.
This has been a campaign that we've discovered started over 100 years ago.
And it started as a euphemism for socialism.
So in 1905, so dig that date, from 1905 to 1921, there was a group called the Intercollegiate Socialist Society. The founder of this group was a novelist, Upton Sinclair, and it was organized by about 100 people that worked in on roughly 60 college campuses across the country. And they felt like they were influencing centers, and coined the term production for use, not for profit, and started to villainize the idea that people wanted to make a profit. Never mind the fact that the ones who made the profit were besides being the wealth creators, they were the job creators.
Well,
And of course, there's always people that are greedy, that's why we have laws and stuff, but they started to villainize the very idea that anybody had more money than they needed. They started that class talk that was so popular
And
in Russia across the ocean.
to downplay the free market.
Yes. So we're just not going to talk about all of these, but this is, if you do have the book, these are interesting. I'm just going to tell you where these people came from. Notice there's a couple of novelists. Jack London is also a novelist. The future president of UAW, that's the United Auto Workers. So unions, there is a huge communist background to unions. And here's an example of that. A college professor from Harvard, a socialist candidate for president that was a leader at Columbia University. I'm sure you've all heard of Clarence Darrow, the famous attorney that tried the Scopes trial. Again, another
Novelist.
novelist,
Jack London.
the first socialist that was ever elected to Congress. And now this is interesting. The first Black man that led the NAACP did not found the NAACP. He was selected by 20 white socialists. It was white socialists who founded the NAACP. He was just their front man that they used. But these men were all socialists and wanted to spread socialism in places of influence like universities as far back as 1905. So I can't remember. I think this Harry Lidler was a historian. I can't remember now. The ISS was set up to throw light on the worldwide movement of industrial democracy known as socialism. And of course, if those of you who know, and really socialism is just the economic mechanism to become communism. It's government ownership or control of all the means of production, whether it's farms or factories or mines or natural resources, and all the means of distribution, such as the transportation, communications, and instruments of commerce. So this is the very antithesis of the free market that they wanted in a republic from the founders. So there was a movement as far, just like 116 years. Now, remember that slide where we said in 1905, this was the richest country. I just find it fascinating that there was this height of prosperity, height of generosity, that it was just at that point in the country's history when there's also a movement to move away from the very principles that brought that prosperity.
Now, this is really interesting because this that we're just going to show you used to be in the U.S. Army Training Manual, okay? And they took it out somewhere during FDR's time. But this was what was in the training manual, okay? This is what it said under democracy. It said a government of the masses, authority derived through mass meetings or any other form of direct expression. It results in mobocracy. The attitude toward property is communistic, negating property rights. And the attitude toward law is that the will of the majority shall regulate, whether it be based upon deliberation or governed by passion, prejudice, and impulse, without restraint or regard to consequences. So the ends justify the means is what it kind of sounds like to me. It results in demagogism, license, agitation, discontent, and anarchy. Now, this is what they said under a republic.
Isn't that interesting that they wanted to teach the difference so
Yeah.
that they could see this is why we're a republic, this is why we're not a democracy.
Authority is derived through election by the people of public officials best fitted to represent them. The attitude toward law is the administration of justice in accord with fixed principles and established evidence with a strict regard to consequences. The attitude toward property is respect for laws, individual rights, sensible economic procedures. A great number of citizens and extent of territory may be brought within its compass. It avoids the dangerous extreme of either tyranny or mobocracy. And it results in statesmanship, liberty, reason, justice, contentment, and progress. So just to review, this is what it says about democracy. It results in demagogism, license, agitation, discontent, and anarchy. And ask yourself if you don't feel a little bit of that happening right now. A republic results in statesmanship, liberty, reason, justice, contentment, and progress. And of course, you know, when you have a lot of people, there's always going to be
Oh, yeah,
imperfection.
not everyone's going to agree.
But overall, these are the fruits of the two. And I just think it's something to be really cognizant of right now as you watch what's going on in your country, because we were set up to be a republic, but we are making decisions that are actually moving us closer to the democracy. And when you learn about how this country was set up to vote, you'll know why, which we will talk about later.
Yes. So Skousen talks about this in the book. This is chapter 12, because we're on principle 12. In spite of these efforts to clarify the difference between a democracy and a republic, the United States began to be consistently identified in both the press, that's where some of those influencers went, and school books, another place where they went, as a democracy. President Woodrow Wilson, helped contribute to the confusion when he constantly identified World War I as the effort of the Allied forces to make the world safe for democracy. That was like his battle cry. This is a man who won presidency by promising the country they were not going to enter World War I, and they entered World War I 3 months later. I just thought I'd throw that in there for you to know. President Wilson had surrounded himself with many of the early recruits of the ISS movement. So these influencers were already, by even just a decade later, you know, into the World War I, were already moving into places of influence in the country. And these may have encouraged the adoption of the slogan, just as they later changed the name of their ISS organization to the League for Industrial Democracy. And they did that because the word socialism was getting a really bad rap because of what was going on with the Bolshevik Revolution towards the end of World War I. By the 1930s, now think this is almost three decades later, the more brilliant young leaders of the ISS had risen to some of the most prestigious positions in politics, press, publishing houses, radio, academic circles, teacher training colleges, the National Council of Churches, and just about every other major center of opinion molding influence. All over the world, socialism had begun to emerge as an abject failure formula. To the extent it was tried in America without ever being actually called socialism, it had created colossal problems, which the founding fathers' formula would have avoided. To adopt socialism, respect and support for traditional constitutionalism had to be eroded and then emasculated. And see, that's why it's not taught in schools anymore, because that was part of that.
The 13th principle is that a constitution should be structured to permanently protect the people from the human frailties of their rulers.
And can we
That-
stop right there for a minute too, and just make sure we don't have any questions or comments?
Hmm.
These have been so quick that we
Yeah.
haven't done that, but do we have any?
No, you guys are doing great, and I'm not seeing any comments.
We're on another roll, right?
Yeah.
So it's important to know that this is why the Constitution was structured, was to protect the people from the weaknesses of their government officials,
Yeah.
basically. And so
It was to put a restraining order on people that have equal flaws to you.
and we had, we had one president that said, hey, well, we got to fix that. And yet that's the point of it. He called it negative.
Yeah, he called it a charter of negative
Negative
liberties.
liberties, yeah. So for it is a truth which the experience of all ages has attested, that the people are commonly most in danger when the dangers of injuring their rights are in the possession of those toward whom they entertain the least suspicion. So Hamilton is saying, you're in the most danger when you're just trusting. You're just, oh, who would want to hurt America? That's all I've ever heard from some of my favorite people. Who would ever want to hurt America? And I'm like, well, we need to start paying attention to see who might want to hurt America, because it's hurting, and we need to be aware of that. And Jefferson said, it would be a dangerous delusion were a confidence in the men of our choice to silence our fears for the safety of our rights. That confidence is everywhere the parent of despotism, not sometimes. He's like everywhere. That is the parent of despotism. Free government is founded in jealousy and not in confidence. It is jealousy and not confidence which prescribes limited constitutions to bind down those whom we are obliged to trust with power. Bind down. That's what he's saying.
And when he says obliged to trust, when you put someone in public office,
Yeah.
we're obliged to give them a certain amount of trust,
Right.
but jealously so, not too openly trusting.
That our Constitution has accordingly fixed the limits to which and no farther our confidence may go. In questions of power, then, let no more be said of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. If we don't know it, we can't bind them, and we don't know it. Therefore, we haven't bound anybody.
George Washington compared it to fire. Listen to this. Government is not reason, which we can just stop and have a good laugh over that all by itself, can we not? Government is not reason. It is not eloquence. That also made me laugh. It is force. George Washington said this.
The President of the United
Yes.
States, who holds office, this is the
Yes.
thing, they got it.
They did. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices as constitutional chains should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? And is that a chilling thought, that government reflects human nature? But when you see it play out, you can absolutely see that
course.
that's true. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. But lacking these, in framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, not angels, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. Again, James Madison and the Federalist. What we love about this principle, it's very straightforward. It's very simple to understand. The men that you're hearing tonight, and we picked a handful, just a cupful, just a little thimbleful of the quotes of these men. They were the men who held the power. When you ever hear anybody talk about American exceptionalism, we're not talking chauvinism that we think we're better than everybody else. We're talking about this country didn't follow the rule, that it didn't follow the normal
pattern.
path, the normal pattern of existence. These men had the power in their hands and knew what men would do. For you who are Latter-day Saints, I have always said it is as if these men had the 121st section of the Doctrine and Covenants that talks about unrighteous dominion written on the fleshy tables of their heart, even though they were born before it ever existed, is scripture for us. I love that they got, we cannot trust men with this power. We have got to put something on them to protect the people from the flaws of human nature in the men that are going to likely have their heads turned by power and money. I love that they got it when they're the ones that held the power in their hands. That's an exception to turn that power away.
And if you stick with us over the next few weeks, you're going to learn how they tried to bind themselves. Skousen said, that is what the Constitution is all about, providing freedom from abuse by those in authority. That's the point. Anyone who says the American Constitution is obsolete, which they do, just because social and economic conditions have changed, does not understand the real genius of the Constitution. It was designed to control something which has not changed and will not change, namely human nature.
And
once you understand that, it all makes sense.
And what's so fascinating about that is that human nature is so unbelievably unpredictable, but by its very unpredictability, you can predict. That's why the best laws incentivize good behavior and disincentivize bad. And bad government does the opposite. So James Madison said, it's proper to take alarm at the first experiment on our liberty. So if someone tries to push a boundary, this is true in personal lives as well. I'm sure you know this. It's proper to take alarm the first chance you think that someone's crossing a line. The free men of America did not wait till usurped power had strengthened itself by exercise. That means more times it got stronger and entangled the question in precedence. Well, why are you complaining about this now? We've been doing it this way forever. We've been stepping over your boundary for decades now. Why all of a sudden? So it's better to do it first, right when it happens. And now one of the most, we feel like articulate philosophers of our time said it this way.
I say this calls for action, and now, nip it in the bud. Nip it in the bud. You got to nip it in the bud. Nip it in the bud. You got to nip it in the bud.
So
we couldn't help ourselves.
We couldn't help ourselves.
Much.
We do
just
love him
so
but
much.
he does say it best is
he really does.
You stop. You need to stop right then, because if you allow it to just flourish,
then it's harder to do because of exercise and precedence. So, and that could serve you well in personal relationships too, I will just say.
That's right. So where are the encroachments of abusive rulers most likely to attack? Is there some basic right which self-aggrandizing politicians seek to destroy first? Ponder it. The founders said we should especially concentrate on the preservation of one particular right because all other rights are related to it. So think about that for a second, and here is your answer.
Serendipitously, the next principle is it.
There we go.
So the last one we're going to talk about tonight, I cannot believe how we are booking along.
I know.
We are cooking with gas. Now, yeah, but we're going to be fine. We're doing good. The 14th principle says that life and liberty are secure only as long as rights to property is secure. Now, who would have guessed that? Most of us would have thought it was life, but property is where they start to erode. As soon as the land, and now get this, I love this so much. And we should talk about him for just a minute because we're going to talk about Adam Smith in the free market principle next week. He was Scottish. He was a contemporary of the founders, and he wrote a book. I always forget the entire name of it. There it is.
Wealth of
An
Nations.
inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, but it's called Wealth of Nations. So Adam Smith said, as soon as the land of any country has all become private property, now that is just such a foreboding to me. The landlords, meaning the governments, like all other men, love to reap where they never sowed and demand a rent, even for its natural produce. Oh, you mean like you can't collect rainwater on your own property? True story. That's a law in some places.
Go ahead.
Without property rights, plundering would tend to completely destroy the incentive of the industrious to develop and improve any more property because they would know it would be taken away. The two best examples we've got are the silly little story of the little red hen not wanting to make bread anymore because everybody wanted it without any help from towards what he was doing, what she was doing. And then the story of Atlas Shrugged that Ayn Rand wrote. She was quite godless. I can't take the last few godless steps with her. She was quite a hedonist and a humanist, but she got the free market. And that book is something. I'm glad I read it. And without property rights, the industrious would be deprived of the fruits of his labor because someone else would get it. Plundering could become organized. That's not just organized crime, people. Mankind would remain on a hand-to-mouth level of survival, as accumulation of anything would only invite attack. So this is a very important right, his properties.
This is Justice George Sutherland, and he was a Supreme Court justice in 1921. He said, man has three great rights, equally sacred from arbitrary interference: the right to his life, the right to his liberty, the right to his property. The three rights are so bound together as to be essentially one right. To give a man his life but deny him his liberty is to take from him all that makes his life worth living. To give him his liberty but take from him the property, which is the fruit and badge of his liberty, is still to leave him a slave. Either way, it leads to unhappiness. And then this is Abraham Lincoln. Property is the fruit of labor. Property is desirable, is a positive good in the world. That some should be rich shows that others may become rich, and hence is just encouragement to industry and enterprise. Let not him who is houseless pull down the house of another, but let him work diligently to build one for himself, thus by example assuring that his own shall be safe from violence. I take it that it is best for all to leave each man free to acquire property as fast as he can.
Meaning as fast as he wants to.
Yeah, some will get wealthy. I don't believe in a law to prevent a man from getting rich. It would do more harm than good, and we can test and measure that. It does do more harm than good.
We've seen it.
Yeah, and for all of the reasons that we just talked about, it just sucks the life out of people if you can't keep what you own, and if you have to take half of what you have to give to somebody who is unwilling to work. It doesn't work. It never has.
Well, you've probably seen some of the memes recently that say things like, congratulations for getting out of school with no debt.
Yeah.
Now, thanks to this, now you do. Now you have debt from school because it's other people's, which is just, it's not right because it's robbing you of the fruit of your labor.
Right.
So the primary purpose of government is to protect property. I mean, this is the purpose. It's not to take it and expropriate it. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, once again, from the Declaration.
John Adams said, the moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred, and that's what he calls it, as sacred as the laws of God, and that there is not a force of law and public justice to protect it, anarchy and tyranny commence. Property must be secured or liberty cannot exist. And I think that's just a common sense statement.
Notice again that he puts anarchy and tyranny together on opposite sides of that pendulum that we talked about. They knew that anarchy leads to tyranny. And so anything that is going to destroy law and order gets used by tyrants. So should government take from the haves and give to the have-nots? The founders believed no. Madison said government is instituted to protect property of every sort, this being the end of government. That alone is not a just government, nor is property secure under it where the property is violated by arbitrary seizures of one class of citizens for the service of the rest. This seems so self-evident to me.
I know.
It hasn't become self-evident, though, has it?
So redistribution of the wealth is unconstitutional. And there was a Butler case in 1936, and you guys will probably have to look that up, but it had
We
to
have to
do
look it up every single
time. But it says after the 1936 Butler case, the Supreme Court began arbitrarily distorting the meaning of the General Welfare Clause to permit the distribution of federal bounties as a demonstration of concern for the poor and the needy. So the Butler case, just kind of expanded
federal welfare
beyond what it was supposed to, what the wording general welfare in the Constitution means.
Well, and let's review where the term general welfare comes from. It's not even really in the law of the land as much as it is. Do you remember? It's from
it's in the
the
preamble. Which
it's
is
just in the
part of
preamble. Well, what I mean, it is to say we're establishing this for this purpose.
Yeah.
So it's not even in the body of the document as far as governing, is what I'm saying.
The general welfare was not, can we build a turtle bridge in Florida, for the good of the general welfare? But if you had, let's say, a lighthouse outside of where you have general shipping that all of our goods are coming in, then that would be more of a general welfare kind of thing,
Mhm.
because it benefits all the states. All of our goods are coming in there.
Yeah.
But this just kind of made it, expanded it beyond what
fact,
it was supposed to be.
Skousen is often very generous in assigning motives to some of these changes. Notice he uses the word distort because to us it feels like a perversion and when the camel sticks his nose
In the tent.
in the tent,
Yeah.
just the little wedge that starts what now is just full-blown federal welfare that was never supposed to exist.
Well, this is James Madison, and he's kind of going to give us an idea of how we've gone beyond. Okay. And
now
this is
notice
him,
this-
he's worried about
Yeah,
it. He's
200
worried
years
about
ago,
it.
300,
Yeah.
300.
He said, if Congress can employ money indefinitely to the general welfare and are the sole and supreme judges of the general welfare, they may take the care of religion into their own hands. They may appoint teachers in state, county, and parish and pay them out of their public treasury.
Now remember, he wrote this as a warning, not a checklist or a to-do.
Yeah. They may take into their own hands the education of children, establishing like manner schools throughout the Union.
Like manner schools, you mean they wanted it common? They wanted common things in school?
They may assume the provision of the poor. They may undertake the regulation of all roads other than post roads. In short, everything from the highest object of state legislation down to the most minute object of police would be thrown under the power of Congress. Were the power of Congress to be established in the latitude contended for, it would subvert the very foundations and transmute the very nature of the limited government established by the people of America. And we don't have a limited government anymore.
Not even close. So de Montesquieu was another semi-contemporary. I can't remember if he was right before them, but this is someone else that all the founders read in common. He was a French statesman and political thinker. Let us therefore lay down, I'm having a real hard time with my throat tonight. Do you mind? Sorry.
Let us therefore lay down a certain maxim that whenever the public good happens to be the matter in question, it is not for the advantage of the public to deprive an individual of his property, or even to retrench the least part of it by law or a political regulation. So individual property has a higher
Priority.
priority than that of, the public. And that really matters, because in a lot of places, when they're coming in and taking your land for things that
They have not
A,
been,
they
they
should
have
not be
not
able to
been
do.
wise, and they have not been righteous in their doing of that based on this principle.
No.
Ludwig von Mises was an Austrian economist in the early 20th century, and his ideas were very unfavorable in like the Frankfurt School of Economics and other places where liberal economic ideas were taking hold, like in the 1930s, I want to say maybe. I always forget exactly.
Mhm.
But he actually came here thinking he would get into this bastion of people that understood the free market and private property, honoring private property, and was just dismayed to find out that thanks to the Intercollegiate Socialist Society and their ilk, these ideas were catching hold here too. But so he was always a voice of opposition to the common or the popular ideas. So he called private ownership and the means of production a necessary requisite of civilization and material well-being, to let people do the things they do well and charge for it and have everyone benefit from it. Only nations committed to the principle of private property have risen above penury, that's poverty, and produced science, art, and literature, where they can do things higher than living hand to mouth. There is no experience to show that any other social system could provide mankind with any of the achievements of civilization except this.
So Skousen asks, so how do we care for the poor? The answer of those who built America seems to be anybody but the federal government.
Churches used to do it, but now there's laws that make it hard for the churches to do that. And
Yeah.
see, that's when you know you've lost liberty, is when you don't have the freedom to do things that are good and right. This quote we just loved because you again can see how that you just test and measure how we have come down a dark road to the place where we are. So he was president in the earlier 20th century and said the lesson should be constantly enforced that though the people support the government should not support the people, because remember, the government creates nothing. They're only giving you what somebody else has already earned if they're giving you anything. The friendliness and charity of our countrymen can always be relied upon to relieve their fellow citizens in misfortune. That has ever been true.
Always.
Then he goes on to say, federal aid in such cases encourages the expectation of paternal care on the part of the government and weakens the sturdiness of our national character, while it prevents the indulgence among our people of that kindly sentiment and conduct which strengthens the bonds of a common brotherhood.
That's the end.
Oh, that's the end of the quote. I couldn't
That's
remember.
the end of the quote.
And
And
that is the end of the principle.
so we want you to know that we are really grateful that you
Would take the time to
take
be
the
here.
time to be here. We hope that you've learned something. We love these principles and we can hopefully, we see that we have departed from them. And, you know, the more people that learn them, the better off we're going to be. And
Because
so,
they can share them in their circles of influence. The more people that know this, the more that we can do something different.
yeah,
Do we have questions? Like I said, we just went rattling through that. Like I said, kind of like a freight train.
yeah.
No, you guys did great. There are no questions.
Any
Is-
comments? Let me mention too, one thing. If you weren't here last week, and you can put your email address in the chat box, you know, for the comments, because Cindy has kindly collected those for us. And so we can send you any links like for the recording for this, or we didn't really, sometimes, those of you who know me well, I speak fluent parentheses. It is my second language. And so sometimes when these things come up, I'll remember something I've read or heard and think, oh, you might be interested in this. You know, I think one of the only things we talked about tonight was Atlas Shrugged. And I know last week we talked about that Harrison Bergeron story. And I'm still looking for this Zmirak article that I mentioned last week. I'm hoping I can find it. I actually wrote to John Zmirak, but I haven't heard back from him.
Oh,
sent
I
him
know,
an
that's
email.
funny.
I know. So, yeah, if you'd like to be on the email list, we can send you stuff. But mostly the biggest thing we sent last time was,
The video link
the video link for
for
last week.
class.
And then we sent the link for the rest of the classes through May 16th. And then I sent the link for our website because we are in the process of adding content to that website. And I think that's where
That
we're going to
works a
put these
lot better
links.
on a computer than on your
Yes,
phone.
lot
Sorry.
better on your computer.
It's a website for dummies, not you, but us.
Yeah, it was for us to create something that we weren't terribly tech friendly and savvy. But we're thinking we're going to put the links for the recordings of these classes there so that I don't have to keep sending you a link. If you miss a night, you can just go to the website. So the link to our website was in that first email too. So if I sent that to you, I won't send you one this week, but if you're new this week, I will send it to you.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Wow. We'll see you next week. We're going to do principles 15
15
to
to-
21.
Yeah, 21.